The views and opinions expressed on My Story Living with Lupus podcast represents each person's individual experience. By listening to this podcast or reading our blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others. As always, consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. My Story Living with Lupus podcast is officially trademarked, all rights reserved. Thank you for joining me for another episode of My Story Living with Lupus podcast. I'm your host, Susan Hendricks, and I'm so glad that you could join me on this Friday morning, March 5th, 2021. Hey, got a question for you. Now, let's just say, for instance, that you were a medical doctor and you received the diagnosis of lupus. How would you react? Well, on today's episode, you'll hear from a medical doctor, Dr. Manisha Rayavarapu. That's right, she'll be telling her story and her journey of living and dealing with lupus. So, you know what I want you to do? That's right. All the way from the United States to Jordan. That's right. Get ready to grab your cup of coffee, your cup of tea, and to our listeners late at night, you know we appreciate you. So get ready to grab your favorite glass of wine and come on and learn about a doctor's journey of living with lupus. Our guest today is a family medicine physician and author of the book Butterfly Boards and Blessings, A Doctor's Journey to Thriving with Lupus. She was diagnosed with lupus in 2010 and started blogging her journey in 2014 under the pen name The Patient Doc. I would like to thank Dr. Rayavarapu for joining us today on My Story Living with Lupus, where she will be discussing and telling her journey of living with this illness. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Doctor, I would like for you to tell your story of how you were diagnosed with this illness and how you started writing your book.
Okay, sure. So I was diagnosed 11 years ago during my second year, the end of my second year of family medicine residency. I had been having symptoms for quite a while. I had been having some hair loss. I had been having a rash on my face. I had also been having some knee pain, some wrist pain, and I was having a lot of fatigue. But I was a medical resident. I was working 60 to 80 hours a week. I was running up and down stairs, going from room to room to see patients. I was studying for board exams. I was writing or doing PowerPoint presentations. So I was under a lot of stress, and I was working really hard. So I just assumed my symptoms were just kind of a result of everything I was doing. I didn't realize everything I was doing was actually triggering something far deeper, triggering my lupus. So that is, when I was diagnosed, I was actually very, very sick at that point. I had developed some fluid retention. I had some swelling and in my face, in my arms, my legs, and so that kind of prompted me to actually see a doctor. And, with a little bit of workup, it was discovered that, yes, I had a lupus.
And
so,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but how did you take that receiving that diagnosis and you being a physician? Did it faze you at all?
Oh, absolutely. I was shocked. I was thinking, wait a minute. I'm a doctor. I don't get sick. I'm a doctor. The patients get sick, not the doctors. So it was a huge surprise. And I think there is some ignorance in bliss in that it's scary when you don't know what it is, but it's also very scary when you've studied it and you realize, oh my goodness, I know what this is, and I kind of have a good idea of what this means. And at that time, when I was diagnosed, I remember thinking back to when I was in medical school. And during medical school, when we were studying immunology and rheumatology, I remember being like, oh my goodness, it must suck to have lupus and MS and these autoimmune disorders. I thought these are the worst. There's no cure. These people must be miserable. And I remember thinking that, when I was learning about these diseases. And here I was, years later, with one of these autoimmune diseases. And I was just, flabbergasted. I was like, what is this? How is this happening to me? This is impossible. But, doctors get sick too.
Okay, let me ask you this also, doctor, and then you can get back to your story. I'm quite sure you have heard from patients that state that they are treated differently. Sometimes doctors don't actually believe that they may have lupus or it's all in their head. You never experienced any of that, have you?
I actually didn't experience it with my lupus diagnosis. When I had other symptoms of other things, there was a lot of confusion, and the doctors would just be like, I don't know, I don't think it's anything, you don't need to worry about it, it's nothing. So my lupus diagnosis actually came a lot easier than for most, because I did have really good doctors taking care of me, and I was in a flare, and my results were glaringly obvious as to what it was. But different symptoms that I've had along the way when I've seen certain specialists and stuff, a lot of times it's like, we don't know why you're feeling that way. Maybe it's something else. And I wouldn't completely call it dismissive, but it's kind of they had no answers for me. So one thing about, getting sick with lupus and getting this chronic illness, it helped me become a better doctor. All of a sudden, I had a deeper understanding now of what a patient goes through on a day-to-day basis, and you realize all of a sudden that this disease isn't just some physical ailment. It's every single part of their life. It affects their families. It affects their financial situations. It's affecting everything in their life, all their relationships. And so all of a sudden I became like more aware of this. We know that it affects their lives, but now the reality has hit me. So I feel that, getting a chronic illness, lupus, has caused me to become a lot more empathetic towards my patients. It's also helped me to become more competent in that, yes, now I dig a little deeper because I realize that those vague symptoms that I have are the same vague symptoms that my patients have. And maybe it isn't just being tired. Maybe there is something more going on there. So, if we can take something good from having this disease, is that it did make me, and does make me, a better physician. When I was diagnosed, I was feeling really alone. I was feeling really isolated. I felt like no one understood, and I was really struggling. I had always enjoyed writing. It was very therapeutic for me. I used to write short stories and poems. So I created this blog to find a community for myself. And it started gaining traction. There really was a good community of people. We were talking to each other. We were helping each other out. And I realized, wow, this is great. I'm able to help people. And the premise of my blog was called The Patient Doc, and it was about bridging the gap between patients and doctors and just kind of helping patients understand some of the physician side of things, and also talking about my journey with lupus. So I loved that, and then the idea came to me, hey, why don't I write a book? I've always wanted to publish a book, and I wanted to do it. I had started writing a book, but, with residency and then becoming an attending physician, life got entirely too busy. And I ended up having to give up on the idea of a book, and I had to stop blogging, too, because it was just too much. So fast forward to 2019, when I got pregnant with my baby. I was high risk, and I was on modified bed rest. And when I was ready to go back to work, COVID happened. And so I decided to stay out for the sake of my baby and also for my safety because I'm on immunosuppressants. And I thought, well, hey, I'll do some telemedicine, but I also have time to finally write this book that I have always wanted to do. So that's what I did. I published my book, Butterflies, Boards, and Blessings, A Doctor's Journey to Thriving with Lupus. And it's about my journey becoming a doctor while living with lupus. But it talks about everything that you go through as someone living with a chronic illness. So it's not just, about lupus. It's also about all chronic illness and what we go through, how this disease impacts our careers, how it impacts our relationships with our friends and family, how it affects our relationships with our partners, how it affects our beliefs and our faith, how, a disease really, our finances, our everything. It affects every single aspect of our life. So I really wanted to show that and make it very clear in the book what we go through. But I wanted to show that despite the obstacles and the challenges, you can still live a happy, fulfilling, successful life with a chronic illness. I've also wrote it because I wanted the people who are not living with a chronic illness to understand what we go through. Because if they can see and they can understand, then they can help us more. They can support us more. So those are just kind of the reasons I wrote it. And I wanted to get those messages across, and also get the message across that through faith you can do anything. So it just started out as writing a book, but this book is a message that needs to be shared.
And where can our listeners order your book from?
My book is available on Amazon, and it's also available on Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and Apple and Google as ebooks. So it is widely available, but Amazon is the main distributor. You can also find the link to my book on my webpage, which is www.thepatientdoc.com, where I do a little bit of blogging still. So, yeah.
I think that it is fantastic that you were able to write a book, and an inspirational book. And I tell people all the time, just because we have this illness, it does not mean that it is a death sentence to us. We still can get up, and we may not be able to do the things at the same pace we used to do, but we can still live life to the fullest with this illness. It's not a death sentence at all. And my perception is, from what I observe, that people need to hear inspirational stories like yours and order your book. It seems like that your book could give hope in the time of darkness when you are diagnosed with this illness. You being a doctor, receiving a diagnosis such as lupus, it's a lot of us with this illness who think that because you are a medical doctor, that you don't bend or break when receiving a diagnosis such as this. But it goes to show people that you are human also. And doctor, I would like for you to emphasize how important it is for patients with this illness to be upfront and honest with their care providers.
I feel, for patients, the most important thing is to have a good relationship, a trusting relationship with their doctor. I always say that the relationship between a physician and a patient is sacred. And if you don't feel like you can be honest or comfortable with your doctor, you should seek another doctor. Because this doctor is going to be the one who's going to be working with you. And you have to be honest. You have to be able to tell us everything. You have to be able to trust that we are going to do the right thing for you. And if you don't have that level of comfort and that level of trust, and I always, feel you should always go and see another physician. Because at the end of the day, as patients, we are our best advocates. No one is going to advocate for ourselves the way we do. So it's so important for patients to be their own advocate, to, be aware of what's going on, to take interest in their health care, to work with their doctors, to be open-minded about treatment and, to be very involved with their care and with their doctors.
Doctor, what medications are you on at this point in time for your lupus?
Currently, I'm taking Plaquenil. I'm also taking Imuran,
Okay.
an immunosuppressant, and I'm also taking Benlysta, which is biologic. I was taking it IV before, and now I take it subcutaneous. So I give myself injections once a week. They are painful, but definitely more convenient than having to drive over to an infusion center and get poked several times before they find a vein, and then have to sit there for an hour or so.
Right.
And then vitamins and stuff like that.
Now, I know the listeners are wondering, since we are in a pandemic, have you received your vaccination?
I have not yet, and solely because my county is out of vaccines for first dosers. The vaccines went out to the healthcare workers first, and although I am technically a healthcare worker, I do not work in a healthcare setting right now, and don't have an office to give it to me. So I'm not going to even say patiently waiting. I'm impatiently waiting to get this vaccine. I would really like it. And so I am waiting to get my vaccine.
Okay. I would like to thank you so much for joining us today and telling your story and your experience. People, the information, I should say, to her book, the link to her website, and her social media pages will be listed in the description box for you guys to connect if you have questions that were not covered on this segment with the doctor. You can get in contact with her via social media. And once again, doctor, thank you so much for joining us and telling us your story of living with this chronic illness, lupus. It is truly appreciated.
Thank you so much. And I'm very thankful to be here, and I just want to leave everyone with the message that they can live a very successful life, a very happy life. And do not lose hope. Be strong. We are warriors.
All right. Doctor, if you could hold on for 1 second, okay? If you would like to appear on an episode of My Story Living with Lupus, you can contact us at mystorylivingwithlupus@gmail.com. Also visit us on our Instagram page and also our website, My Story Living with Lupus. Thank you so much for tuning in today and hearing the story of Dr. Rayavarapu. And I hope I did not massacre her name up that much, but I want you to remember something about all of us who are fighting with this chronic illness called lupus. We fight for our health every day in ways that most people don't understand. And sometimes the smallest steps we take in the right direction ends up being the biggest step of our lives. We tiptoe, but we did take a step. And behind every chronic illness is just a person trying to find their way in the world. You see, we want to find love and be loved and be happy just like anyone else. We want to be successful and do something that matters. But we're just dealing with unwanted limitations in our hero's journey. I'm Susan Hendricks, your host for My Story Living with Lupus podcast. I want you to have a peaceful, positive, and oh so blessed weekend. I'll see you next week for another episode.